Fentanyl.
No way they should be using it. That stuff is dangerous.
They don't know that right here in that center, was where pregnant women were sold.
Right here.
Right here in the center. No reference. That's what I hate.
No power outage is gonna stop me. I love it. For decades, Cuba has been one of the most talked about and most misunderstood countries in the world. To some, it represents revolution, independence, and resistance. To others, it represents government control, economic hardship, and broken promises. But what is life really like for the people who live here? On my first day in Cuba, I witnessed beautiful classic cars, powerful African history, political pride, and the daily struggles caused by shortage and blackouts. I spoke with Cubans about Fidel Castro, socialism, the United States embargo, and what they truly want for their country's future. I also experienced the streets of Havana after dark when electricity suddenly disappeared and much of the city was left in darkness. This is not the Cuba you see in political speeches or tourist advertising. This is Cuba through the eyes of its people. Welcome to the Unfiltered World with PA. After years of hearing so many different stories about Cuba, I was finally here. This was my first visit to the island and my 38th country traveled. As I walked out of the airport, I was excited, curious, and unsure of exactly what I would find. I came to experience everyday life, listen to the Cuban people, learn more about the history, culture, and struggles of Afro-Cubans. I did not come to repeat political talking points or tell Cuba's story from the outside. I came to see the country for myself. My first day in Cuba was about to begin.
Biden before. So with Biden, there was quite of a switch from Obama to Biden.
Okay.
So he actually promised to do a few things in respect to Cuba. First, that's something called the money which is sent from Cuban Americans to their family, remittances.
Oh, okay.
Remittances. Actually, he didn't told the remittances, and there were some things that were actually implemented by Biden that helps that. In terms of migration, in terms of things were not as they were with Obama before.
Oh, okay. It was better on Obama?
It was way better.
On Obama?
You can imagine cruise ships coming to Cuba.
Okay.
There were around 3-4 cruise ships per week coming to Cuba, Havana port, and coming to the rest of the island. There were cruise ships, there were people flying back and forth to Cuba. So it was a boom. It was the best moment in Cuba,
Because that's when, as you can make money. You can make money every day.
Exactly. Cuba actually leave. That's our car. That's
okay.
Car.
Oh, wow. Okay. My first day in Cuba challenged many of the things I thought I understood about this country. I had already witnessed its beauty, history, political complexity, and the daily struggles of the Cuban people. But my journey was only beginning. How much of the population is Afro-Cuban?
Well, there's one thing in respect to statistics in Cuba. So last time I checked in Google, so they were saying around 40% of Cuban population was mixed. 40% of Cuban population was mixed, and from that 40, they were saying around 10-15% was black. I don't believe in statistics. I don't believe in that.
It's more than.
They're more than 10 or 15% of Cuban population is black. More than that. Wow. But something happened with the information. Something happened with.
I'll get in the back or front.
You can just choose.
Yeah, in the front. I can get some.
Okay, perfect. Yes.
Wow. Look at this. It's a real car. Oh.
1952 car.
1952.
Yeah, 1952. Wow.
This is dope. I love it. I love it.
That was a surprise. I was actually talking to Louis and Louis, what are you doing on 25th? Louis was telling me, no, I'm doing nothing because Louis is very busy. You know, people actually.
Louis demand.
Yeah, it's very demanding.
He look like a model.
Yeah.
Thank you, Louis. One of the first things you notice in Cuba is the number of classic American cars still traveling the streets. Many of these vehicles are more than 60 years old, but replacing them is not easy. Limited access to new cars and original parts has forced Cuban mechanics to become extremely creative. They repair, rebuild, and adapt whatever they can find to keep these cars running. In Cuba, these vehicles are more than tourist attractions. For many families, they are transportation, income, and a powerful symbol of survival.
But he makes sure the pieces are authentic. You know.
How do you get the parts?
So that's a good question. Most of the parts, they are imported from Panama, from America. There are a lot of Cuban American whose business is sending those parts and pieces to Cuba. They will sell it at a higher price in Cuban market.
Okay.
So that's how people actually get to maintain the car.
Okay. But it's at a higher price.
And sometimes, you know what, as I was telling you, they are very innovative. When I'm saying creative and innovative, this is something just running in Cubans' blood. That's something that we have learned to be from more than 60 years. You know?
Right.
So if we don't have the big parts and pieces, our mechanics will try to make that part and pieces that you need.
Okay.
You know? So that is one of the options how people can get the parts and pieces.
As an American traveling to Cuba, I couldn't simply book any hotel I wanted. United States regulations prohibit Americans from staying at certain properties connected to the Cuban government. So, like many American visitors, I stayed in a privately owned Airbnb. This would be my home during my time in Havana. It would also give me a chance to experience life inside a real Cuban neighborhood. After settling in, it was time to head back out and begin exploring the Cuba most tourists never see. After settling to the Airbnb, I headed back into the streets of Havana for my first major interview. I wanted to understand Cuba beyond the classic cars, tourist attractions, and political headlines. During this conversation, we would discuss the revolution, socialism, the United States embargo, and the challenges facing the Cuban people. But I also wanted to hear the story that is too often overlooked, the history, identity, and daily experiences of Afro-Cubans. Before the 1959 revolution, the United States had enormous influence over Cuba's economy and political affairs. American companies controlled major interests in industries such as sugar, banking, utilities, and tourism, while Havana became a popular destination for wealthy American visitors. Although Cuba was officially an independent nation, many Cubans believed the United States had far too much control over their country. My guide explained how that influence helped create the resentment that would eventually fuel the Cuban Revolution.
You see, this is downtown. You see the people. You notice that it's actually like a very colonial place because of the narrow streets. That's something very peculiar from colonial urbanistic layouts. Narrow streets, big buildings, especially this street, the name is called Cuba Street. But in this same street, we have places like this one. This is the Ministry of the Finance Ministry.
Okay.
But we have also a lot of banks in this same artery.
Who the banks are owned by?
The banks were made back in the 40s and 50s when Cuba was capitalist, you know.
Okay.
And this artery, as they were built, so many banks, was considered the Wall Street of Havana. That's how it was named back in the days.
The Wall Street of Havana.
Yes. So remember, Cuba was somehow a neo-colonial of America.
Okay.
You know, first we were colonized by Spain, then later after 1898. We were then later 1898 or 1902, where we were somehow taken by America.
Really?
Yes,
Taken
America.
by America?
Yeah, we were actually governed by America from
Really?
1902
I didn't
to
know that.
1959. Yes, that was the second period of our history. From 1902 to 1959, la próxima guara. So Cuba was owned by America. Our first president was American president called Tomás Estrada Palma.
What?
Exactly, yeah. From 1902 to 1959. So that's why we have so much similarities of American architecture. That's why Vedado happens.
As we continued through Havana, a man on the street began yelling in our direction. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening, but he was simply trying to get my attention. It was a small but memorable moment that immediately pulled me into the energy of Havana streets.
See in this area, because this is the oldest area. This is Old Havana, and it was founded in 1519 was the year in which Havana was founded, specifically November 16, 1519. So that's when Havana was founded. That's when the Spanish reached. No, mi hermano. That's when the Spanish reached this area. But before arriving Havana, of course, there was a whole island that needed to be discovered. You know, the whole island was before reaching Havana. Let me just put it right here, 1 second. They were coming all the way from Haiti. It's a down dictatorship. This is Haiti and Dominican Republic that was called actually the. Come on. Let us. It's like we hate dictatorship. Dictatorship.
You know I had the camera.
I don't know, but that's something that's happening lately because people are
speaking
are speaking out. Yes, people are speaking out. People are making protests. People are somehow protesting against the amount of hours with electricity, the amount of hours with the scarcity of food. You wanna talk to him? You wanna talk to him? Okay, let us go. Let's go. Let us see. Let's see what he said.
Of course, this Cuban man had a lot to say, and I was ready to listen.
La patraña, porque es una dictadura viva.
This is a dictatorship. This is dictatorship which is alive, you know.
That's
what he said.
Apunta para acá, que te voy a decir para que hable.
So notice what I'm about to say.
Ponte para aquí, mira.
Look at
Yo
me.
soy reportero de Cubanet.
I'm a reporter from Cuba Network.
Wow.
Acá en Cuba tuve problemas.
He had a problem here in Cuba.
El gobierno, el régimen, el
The
sistema, la
regime,
policía
the government, the police
usó personas de mi familia
used people from his family
para que me robaran los medios de
to
transmitir.
steal his actually camera and his transmission means,
Porque estaba haciendo un reportaje
because he was making a report
en conjunto con la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, la UJC, los
joining
CDR,
the
que son organizaciones cada
Women's
más.
Federation, like also the Committee of Defense of the Revolution. He was actually like making a program with them.
Que se acercaron a mí esas personas, porque en la ciudad hay mucho tráfico de químicos, de muchas drogas, químicos, papelitos,
Yeah,
crack,
he was actually
cocaína,
making that.
acá en la ciudad.
Yeah.
Y
¿Y,
cuando-
de qué era lo que tú estabas? ¿Qué cosa lo que tú estabas haciendo?
Reportajes de las direcciones donde la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas y los CDR, todas esas personas, me llevaban y me decían, mira, aquí se vende esto, lo sabe el policía, lo sabe el otro, lo
He
sabe el
was
otro.
reporting
Y están
to
en complot,
like,
en
to the
complot.
Cuban organizations, places where drugs were sold.
Entonces mandan a familia para que me roben los medios y me
He
tienen
then
así.
talked to
Estoy acá
his
en Cuba
family
ciego.
to steal their actually cameras.
Wow.
The
Entonces,
organization talked to their family to steal their
Acá
cameras.
también hay otros reporteros, por ejemplo uno que se llama Pedro Quiala.
There are some other reporters. One of them, his name is Pedro Quiala.
En vez de informar allá al gobierno lo que está pasando,
Instead of informing government what was happening,
lo que está tratando de desprestigiar acá a mí.
he was trying to take credit from
¿Entiendes?
what
Entonces
he
está
was saying.
prestado con la dictadura de aquí y sirviendo al gobierno de los Estados Unidos en complot
They were
para
working for
desprestigiar.
Cuban government, but also working for American government.
O sea que tiene doble personalidad, doble moral.
Like double moral.
Double
So, you know,
¿Entiendes?
Yeah.
Entonces manipula al gobierno de allá
manipulating the
y manipula al
American
gobierno de
government
aquí.
and manipulating like.
¿Entiendes?
Ask him, what do he want to say to America?
¿Qué te gustaría decirle a ti al pueblo a las personas de Estados Unidos?
Las personas de los Estados Unidos, por favor, que no se dejen manipular.
Please
por las ratas,
don't let news manipulate you.
por las
Don't let
ratas y las cucarachas que salen de
from
noche
the rat and cockroach.
a gritar y a decir abajo la dictadura, que esos son unos impostores. Eso
Ya.
los mandan la dictadura de aquí a que salgan a la calle porque tienen muy organizado su organización. Ellos no están en contra del
Pero ¿qué es
gobierno.
lo que tú quisieras decirle
Al gobierno de los Estados Unidos.
¿Qué le está, al gobierno qué le estarías diciendo?
¿Qué le quiero decir? Que mantengan ellos la calma y que miren, que si realmente ellos quisieran libertad para Cuba, ellos salieran de día a exigir libertad y justicia.
They
porque el
will be
gobierno de los
demanding
Estados Unidos-
freedom for Cuba. So that
No de noche no vale.
Okay.
De noche están quemando la basura y eso le hace daño a los niños, a los ancianos, a los viejitos.
they are burning the garbage. They are burning the garbage, and that is actually harmful for elder and from kids.
¿Entiendes? Y entonces ellos mismos, el mismo gobierno manda a las personas aquí a que den fuego en la candela
The same government is the one who is provoking that,
para dar a entender al gobierno de
so
los
that
Estados
they
Unidos
let know to the American government that,
de que es el
that
pueblo
this
de
is
Cuba.
the Cuban people.
No, es mentira.
It's
Eso
not
es
Cuban
mentira.
people. It's a
Los
lie.
opositores que hay acá y las personas que están en total
The
desacuerdo con el
opposition
gobierno
is that
no
are
salen a la
actually
calle de noche.
against the
noche
government.
no
They are
salen.
not going outside the street.
Y le decimos al gobierno de los Estados
We
Unidos
say
que
to the American government
el mismo problema que hay de noche
that the
con
same
la
problem
electricidad
that we
es
have
de día.
with the electricity during nights, it happens the same during the daylight.
Basta ya de decir que tenemos
Stop
miedo
saying that we are afraid.
y de decir a los Estados Unidos, tengo miedo, me van a matar. No, nos están matando hace 64
They are
años.
killing us for more than 64 years.
¿Ya entiendes? Dile al gobierno de los Estados Unidos que no se dejen
Tell the
engañar.
government of America that don't let themselves
Que la mayoría de los que salen a la
lied.
calle son los mismos
that the
comunistas.
same that they are going to the street are the same communists.
Ya
It's not the
entendí.
opposition.
Los que están en desacuerdo con el
The
gobierno
one
están
who are
tranquilos en su
against
casa.
the one who are against the government are quiet at home.
¿Ya entendiste?
Thank you.
That's
Dios, patria y libertad. Abajo la
peace
dictadura.
and libertad, freedom. Gracias, mi hermano.
Cuba has its struggle with drugs, just like the United States and many other countries. It was something I wasn't expecting to witness, especially during my first few hours in Havana. Things that happened, I have heard, watching to the natives, but it just hearing it from someone who had witnessed it.
This is something that is happening right now. You see that guy is right there, the two guys. Like they are. It's like fentanyl. Yeah. It's finally from. It's a drug called in Cuba. Yeah.
No way they should be using that. That stuff is dangerous. How do they get the money for that?
It's very cheap in Cuba. I'm saying it's a derivation from fentanyl. It's not just fentanyl, but
Okay.
still it's very harmful.
Right,
You know?
right. Synthetic version.
It seems exactly like
Yeah.
one, like a little paper.
I thought they were just tired of sleeping.
You know, if you were coming to Obama, all this area would be the music out loud, playing song, and a lot of like tourists. You know,
Right.
this is Plaza Vieja, all square. That's the name of this square.
As the conversation continued, I wanted to understand what everyday life is like for Afro-Cubans. People of African descent have played a major role in shaping Cuba's music, religion, culture, and national identity. But despite that deep influence, many Afro-Cubans still face economic inequality, discrimination, and challenges that are often overlooked. I wanted to hear their story directly. How is life for Afro-Cubans compared to the white Cubans?
La vida de los negros cubanos, cuán diferente es la vida de los negros a la vida de los blancos en estos momentos.
El primer problema está en que la economía de las familias negras ha estado siempre al azar. O sea,
Black families' economy has been always like have been always ¿cómo se dice? Basada, diríamos, has been always behind. It's all behind.
producto uno de la esclavitud. Cuba es el último país de América,
No,
a excepción de Brasil.
Okay.
Claro.
Okay. Due to the slavery, Cuba was the second to last country to abolish slavery.
Oh, wow.
Entonces,
Brazil was the last, but before Brazil was Cuba.
Ah,
entonces esos casi 5 siglos de esclavitud provocan que la negritud, que las familias negras se mantengan en ese atraso.
It was 500 years of slavery.
wow.
Entonces,
So easy to black families to take the right. It's like están en desventaja, disadvantage. 500 years of disadvantage compared to white families.
For generations, Afro-Cubans have preserved their identity through music, religion, family, storytelling, and tradition. Even during periods of slavery, discrimination, and political change, African culture remained deeply rooted in Cuban life. I wanted to understand how those traditions survive and how Afro-Cubans continue protecting that legacy today. How has the Afro-Cubans managed to survive this long, regardless of the situation?
¿Cómo hemos podido sobrevivir tanto tiempo con esta situación?
Fernando tiene un término que es transculturación.
There is a subject, and there is a term that was made by Fernando Ortiz. That the name of the term is transculturation.
Entonces, sobre la base de la transculturación, el pueblo cubano ha integrado a la negritud como parte de su identidad.
Okay, integrado en el tú. So based on the term transculturation, black people have integrated the fact of being black. ¿Lo ha integrado a la qué?
La Cuba ha integrado
Sí.
el negro en su identidad.
Has integrated the fact of being black into their identity.
Entonces, no es como en los Estados Unidos. En los Estados Unidos hay una segregación muy clara.
In America, we have a segregation, like a clear, very segregation.
Pero en Cuba no. Por ejemplo, Antonio Maceo, que era un general de la Guerra de Independencia, eso no pasa en los Estados Unidos.
But we did not have that in Cuba because we have very important leaders from the independence war that were black.
Entonces, en Estados Unidos no hay ningún general de la Guerra de Independencia, con Washington, ni con Lincoln, o sea, en esa época no hay personas que cuando se hable de la historia de los Estados Unidos, tú digas, bueno, aquí había un general negro, en Cuba sí pasa.
So you don't have in America, compared to America, you don't have leaders that fought for American independence that were black.
En Cuba sí.
We do have it in Cuba.
Entonces, hay que integrar a esas personas negras. Había un porcentaje considerable, casi el 60%, en la fila del Ejército Libertador.
More than 60% of the soldiers who fought for Cuban independence or within Cuban Independent Army were black.
Wow.
Entonces, esas familias salen a relucir en la independencia.
So those families were actually highlighted within the independence struggles.
Entonces se queda esa, más allá de la música, por ejemplo, la influencia de los africanos, particularmente la música, y la música es parte de la identidad cubana.
Apart from the music, because we were so much influenced by the Africans that were the slaves that were brought to Cuba, we were so much influenced the music in that.
Y la música es parte de la identidad cubana.
The
Por
music
tanto,
is part of a Cuban identity.
entonces no puedes separar negros de la música
It's not
y la
possible
música
to separate black from music
y música de identidad
and
cubana.
music from a Cuban identity.
Entonces, por eso es que el negro se mantiene.
That's why the black man or the black in Cuba se mantiene.
Dentro de la visibilidad.
It's actually inside of this visibility you know,
Y
inside of
por
this.
eso no hay segregación en Cuba.
That's why he thinks there's no segregation in Cuba.
Oh, okay.
Sin embargo,
However,
antes de la revolución,
Before the
estaban
revolution,
los clubes estos
there
en
were
los
clubs
que no había posibilidad de que los negros entraran.
that that it was not possible that black people get into that clubs.
Y bueno, el caso de Batista, que quiso entrar siendo presidente de la República al Havana Jazz Club,
Batista, one of the very important Cuban president, he wanted to enter one of those clubs, and he was not let. He was not allowed to be part of the club or to invite for the fact that he was black.
Wow. Wow.
sin embargo es el presidente más negro que ha tenido.
But it's actually the blackest president we have had in Cuba.
Wow. It's good. As our conversation continued, I began to understand just how deeply the United States embargo affects everyday life in Cuba. My guides explained how restrictions on trade and banking have made it harder for the country to obtain fuel, medicine, food, equipment, and other basic necessities. Cuba has had its own internal problems, but the embargo has added another layer of pressure to a population already struggling with shortages and uncertainty. Is the embargo helping everyday people here in Cuba, or is it hurting them?
En el caso del tema del bloqueo, ¿lastima a las personas, daña a las personas o los ayuda?
Bueno, el bloqueo directamente, el bloqueo es una medida de guerra.
It's actually like a measure which is hurting people.
Entonces, evidentemente en la vida cotidiana se ven las afectaciones que
It is
trae.
perceived in daily life how much impacted is the life of people under this embargo.
As I listened to the different perspectives, I began to wonder about Fidel Castro himself. Was he truly trying to build a better and more equal Cuba, or did the revolution eventually become something very different from what he originally promised? I wanted to understand whether Afro-Cubans still believe Castro was trying to help the people. Do he think Castro was trying to make life better for the Afro-Cubans?
¿Tú crees que Fidel intentó hacer la vida mejor para los negros cubanos?
Fidel, en ese sentido, cometió un error.
He made a mistake.
Y es, por ejemplo, Fidel crea una asociación para los campesinos.
He did good things, like creating an association for the farmers,
Para las mujeres,
creating an organization for the women's.
pero no se crea una asociación para resolver los problemas del negro.
But it wasn't created an organization to solve black families' problems.
Entonces, los problemas de los negros se quedan en los problemas de los pobres.
So then the black problems are somehow where the poor problems are.
¿Por qué? Porque se asocia.
It's associated with the problem of a poor, not
Entonces,
with the black.
no hay una diferencia, no hay políticas, como hubo políticas para las mujeres,
There's no policy
no hay políticas particulares para adelantar la problemática del
to
negro.
advance the racial problem in Cuba.
In America, we have the NAACP, we had people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X.
Malcolm X.
Who are those figures in Cuba?
Exactamente. En Estados Unidos, por el tema de las guerras civiles que hubieron en los 60, estuvo Malcolm X y estuvo Martin Luther King. ¿Quiénes son esos Martin Luther King? ¿Quiénes son esos Malcolm X en Cuba?
Habría que hablar, fíjate, no hay activismo negro, no hay activismo a lo Malcolm X.
There's not an activism like Malcolm X.
Hay estudios teóricos, académicos,
There are studies, academical studies, theoretical studies
de personas, por ejemplo, Esteban Morales,
from different professors. I said one of his name is Esteban Morales. Esteban Morales.
una de las personas que más ha estudiado el tema de la minería.
One of the person who has studied the most in relation to race in Cuba.
Zuleika Romay,
Zuleika Romay, another important name.
Heriberto Feraudi,
Heriberto Feraudi,
Víctor Fowler.
Victor Fowler.
Entonces, estas personas lo que hacen es una búsqueda de la negritud en el ambiente académico.
So what they're doing is to find samples within the academic environment having to do with the negritud. He's sometimes referring to negritude. Negritude is the black history.
Pero bueno, si busca personas activas, digamos, personas que activamente han hecho resistencia, Jesús Menéndez, por ejemplo.
People, if you're searching for people who are being actively defending the cause of the black people, he mentioned Jesús Menéndez.
¿Qué pasa? Pero Jesús Menéndez era campesino, entonces Jesús Menéndez está, como ahorita hablábamos,
He was a farmer. He was a farmer.
Entonces,
¿Qué año era de Jesús Menéndez?
Bueno, Jesús Menéndez lo mataron en el 49.
1930, 1940.
Most of what Americans hear about Cuba comes through the U.S. media, and that coverage is often shaped by politics. We hear about communism, government control, and economic hardship, but rarely about the complexity of everyday Cuban life. So what do the media get wrong? What part do they get wrong?
Which media?
Yeah, both American media.
Okay. ¿Qué es lo que muestra los medios americanos que está completamente equivocado o diferente a la realidad?
Yo creo que las ganas de vivir del pueblo cubano. O sea, lo que el gobierno llama resistencia, que realmente no es resistencia, es un deseo de vivir con decoro y dignidad.
Pero ¿qué cosa es lo que el medio americano muestra que es diferente a la realidad nuestra?
Que por ejemplo en Cuba todo el mundo pasa hambre.
So, American media is showing constantly how Cuban people are starving every time. You know, they're more radical. They're showing the scarcity, the pure scarcity. ¿Qué más?
La idea de que Cuba.
The idea, he's constantly selling the idea that Cubans are scarcity. ¿Qué más? De Cuba.
La idea de que en Cuba hay más violencia.
The violence, highlighting violence. ¿Qué más? Anda por ahí, eso por ahí.
La idea de que Cuba no tiene actores privados.
Highlighting that Cuba lack from private sector.
Que impulsa la economía también.
That is actually something that is somehow pushing the economy to be better. ¿No?
Entonces hay un discurso, claro, que responde a los medios de prensa. Bueno, los medios de prensa
there is a narrative that responds to the media.
Y me conecto con lo que decía antes, que si no vienes y conoces, no vas a tener idea de que existe.
But if you don't come and visit, you won't know what it really happened.
Entonces sí, hay personas que pasan muchísima hambre.
Yes, there's a lot of people who are going through a struggle, who are struggling now.
Hay personas que no tienen, que el salario no les alcanza para vivir real.
Cannot afford life, cannot afford food.
Sin embargo, hay personas que tienen proyectos.
There are people who have projects
comunitarios, por
community
ejemplo,
project
para ciertos sectores.
To certain sectors, like people who are finding ways for them and for others.
Cuba sits only about 90 miles south of Key West, yet the lives of everyday Cubans can feel a world away from those of us in the USA. After hearing about the shortages, blackouts, and economic pressure facing Cubans' family, I wanted to move beyond politics. What can everyday Americans do to support everyday Cubans and help improve their lives? What do we think American people can do to help?
¿Qué tú crees que el pueblo americano pudiera hacer para ayudar?
Yo creo que lo primero es entender el conflicto.
Understand the conflict is the first thing. Understand the conflict is the first thing.
Entender el diferente entre Cuba y Estados Unidos. Luego, familiarizarse.
to get familiar with that conflict.
Y ya luego, tal vez de manera más individual, venir a Cuba. Pero claro, no pueden venir porque hay una...
Exactly. And come to Cuba. Come to Cuba. Of course.
La única forma que tú puedes entender el conflicto, o sea, la única forma, o al menos la que yo considero, la única forma que puede los estadounidenses entender y ayudar al pueblo cubano es estando en el espacio.
So the only way American people could understand the conflict is for being in Cuba, visiting Cuba, you know?
Porque es la manera más expedita, más clara.
It's the fastest way
para ver la Cuba que no es la Cuba que se dice en el noticiero acá, pero tampoco es la Cuba que se vive en Miami.
to actually see the reality. But the reality is no longer what is shown from Cuba in America, but it's not even the reality that is shown in Cuba's media.
As our conversation came to an end, I wanted to give my guides the final word. After everything they had shared about Cuba, Afro-Cuban life, the revolution, the embargo, and the future of their country, I had one last question. What do they want the rest of the world to know about Cuba? If the world is watching right now, what would he want to say to the world?
Si en estos momentos el mundo te estuviera viendo, ¿qué tú tendrías que decirle al mundo? ¿Qué tú le dirías al mundo?
Está difícil, hay que decirle muchas cosas.
I have a lot to say to the world.
Pero yo creo que hay que entender, el mundo debería entender que primero esta es la única casa que tenemos, el planeta
So
Tierra.
the world should understand that this place where we are live, it's our home.
Entonces, entender que esta casa puede irse a la mierda por dos bombazos.
Understand that this home could just be blown up or could just disappear. ¿Por culpa de qué?
De dos bombazos.
Or just two bombs or bumps.
Es importante entenderlo.
It's essential to understand that.
Porque además no hay nada más importante que la vida. Yo que soy un hombre
There's
católico.
anything as important as life.
Por encima de la vida está, o sea, por debajo de la vida está el petróleo.
Below life, it's actually petroleum, diesel,
Está las fronteras, está la
frontiers, religion,
está cualquier cosa, porque sin vida no hay humanidad.
Without life, there is no humanity.
Entonces, yo que siempre he querido ser presidente de este país, de verdad.
I've always wanted to be president of this country.
Yo siempre he dicho que hay que llevar al entendimiento como inmediato, que conversando, que viendo más allá de lo de ahora. O sea, hoy tenemos un problema, mañana no tenemos por qué tenerlo. Enterramos al Imperio Romano, enterramos a los griegos, enterramos al Imperio de Felipe II, enterramos todo eso. La humanidad ha seguido avanzando.
We buried the Romans, we buried the Philips, the Greeks, we buried the Philips II. We understand that the humanity needs to evolve, continue.
O sea, hemos superado grandes momentos, nos hemos dado,
We have been go over great moments.
hemos pasado malos momentos como
We
la
have
Segunda Guerra
had
Mundial,
very bad moments like the Second World War.
y aún así seguimos en el espacio, o sea, seguimos aquí.
And
Y eso hay que,
we are still here.
y eso hay que defenderlo.
We need to defend that.
Eso hay que mirarlo y decir, no podemos perder, porque
That's something
las
that we need
oportunidades
to-
no son infinitas.
Opportunities are not infinite.
Y un día va a ser la última bomba.
One day, the last bomb will be dropped.
After leaving the museum, we continued to Independence Square, one of Havana's most important public spaces. Surrounded by monuments and symbols of Cuba's struggle for freedom, I was about to learn more about the people who fought for independence and the African presence within that history.
And I will tell you my viewpoint in respect to the historical center of a city,
Okay.
especially places like urban areas, like squares, streets. So they have done an amazing work. And I have to tell you the good side of this. The good side of this is that the historian office of the city is in charge of the restoration of the places in the Old Havana system, you know. Thanks to the work that they made, Havana was declared a World Heritage Site.
Okay.
That was in 1982.
Okay.
So Havana, due to the amount of history, Havana was considered a World Heritage Site. And that's something very good.
Yeah. So they get help from United Nations.
They get from United Nations, they get help from anyone, any nation who want also be part of the history of Havana. So in Havana, we have representation from Russia. We have an Orthodox Church. A representation from Africa. We have the Casa de Africa.
Okay.
And we have also a representation from Asia.
Okay.
They are all represented here and they contributed to the restoration of the city.
Okay.
My concern about the restoration, or my concern about how the historian office from the city has been somehow changed places, is that they are being lefting out black people.
Oh.
They are being lefting out the effort that was made from African enslaved. But let's say you're coming from the first time here and you come on, let us walk a little bit around. And you see that square, you see places like this important building, another, you see right now also the fountain and kids playing around. You see the arches, you see the columns.
Yeah.
But if you are a little bit more observant, you will go to that same advertisement right there, and it shows you what they did, how was Havana back in the days and how was this square now.
Okay.
It shows you that. But anything that is being said in this square tells you about the African that were sold right here.
Wow.
That's my concern.
They don't talk about it.
They don't talk about it, they don't say a word about it. So people who comes to the old city, they don't know about it. They don't know that right here in that center, was where pregnant women were sold.
Right here.
Right here in the center. And there's one little thing telling you that. But if you go to that corner, they were disabled enslaved were sold. Disabled. So they were lacking from. They were shot. Sorry?
Oh, I didn't know they were still selling them.
They let's say by accident they chopped one hand or they chopped a leg, and they were sold in that corner.
Really? Wow.
So pregnant women right here in the center, disabled enslaved who had accident were actually sold there, and right there in the corner were the place where like enslaved in good shape were sold.
Oh wow.
You know, bad history. It's
So the name of this square right now, what's it called?
the name of the square is Old Square.
Old Square.
Old Square.
But no reference to
No
to
reference.
being an auction
That's
block.
that's what I hate.
While standing in Independence Square, my guide pointed out something deeply troubling. Although enslaved Africans were once auctioned in this very location, there was no visible reference to slavery or to the people who suffered here. His concern was that by leaving out this history, an important part of Cuba's African story was slowly being erased.
It's very, very sad how history can be erased. Can be,
So there aren't any Afro-Cubans making any decisions on this?
the historian office of the city. Within the historian office of the city, we don't have any Afro-Cuban.
There's none making decisions on this.
No, I was in a course like a week ago, and my proposal, my idea of the touristic product was a tour in the historical area in which I highlighted the presence of Afro-Cubans.
Right.
They all look at me like, What are you saying? What are you saying? The only thing African slave did in Havana was carrying blocks. I said, you don't know. You don't know what you're saying?
Just carrying blocks?
Carrying blocks and transporting blocks to create buildings.
So, in retrospect, they're trying to erase your history.
Yes, that's what I think. It's a concept called, that's what I followed, an approach that's called decolonial approach, a decolonial approach. It means like I'm talking about what our African enslaved did. I'm talking about the presence of Afro-Cubans within the construction of the historical center.
Wow, that's not good.
Yeah.
As we walked through Old Havana, it was impossible to ignore how much of this city was built during the era of slavery. Hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans were brought to Cuba, and their labor helped shape the country's economy, culture, and identity. But behind the beautiful buildings and historical streets are stories of suffering, resistance, and survival that are too often left untold.
Approximately brought from Western Africa to the Americas around 12.4 millions. 12.4 million African slaves were brought all the way from Western Africa to the Americas. 5% of that amount were going to America. But 41% was going to Brazil by the Portuguese.
Yeah.
The rest was taken to the Caribbean and Central America. So it was a great number of Africans that were brought to Cuba, especially in the sugar boom.
Right.
You know, so our territory was exploded. Our territory especially were exploded by the Spanish, but we also know the nations that were involved in the transatlantic slave trade, like Dutch, like Portuguese, like French, English. They were involved into the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
So they were exchanging goods for human beings in Africa.
Right.
And the second leg of the journey, that was like the Middle Passage, they were bringing all the way these Africans to African enslaved to Cuba.
Wow. As we continued through Old Havana, the conversation turned to freedom of speech. Some Cubans are willing to criticize the government openly, while others feel the personal consequences of speaking out. I wanted to understand how much freedom people truly have to express disagreement and what risks they might face when they do.
The thing is, like, you know what? A lot of people get into trouble, and a lot of people speak out, and a lot of people resist under these conditions, because sometimes what happens in response to that is that people get affected. Your family get affected. Because of course government would take measures to your family.
Wow.
And would do things to you and through your family, to hurt you through your family.
Wow.
So I don't want to get my family.
Exactly.
You should do it with me,
Right. Not the family.
not the family. You know, that's what this man was telling, that they stole their cameras. They talked to their family, and their family actually stole their cameras. There was a guy.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Por eso que había un consorte ahorita estaba ahí.
Even with Cuba's struggles, not everyone has turned against communism. Some Cubans, especially those who remember life before the revolution, still believe the system brought greater equality, education, healthcare, and national independence.
There is this complex timing. There are still people who believe in Fidel Castro ideology.
Okay.
So if you ask my mother is pro-communism. Why? Because she actually felt the transition. My grandmother, let us get some safe. So this generation, from my mother, from my great-grandmother, this generation, you will see that they talk differently about this communism. And why? Because they were benefited by the transformation held by Castro.
It was worse, sir.
It was no. It was better. It was better for
them.
for them and for me and for us. Because a lot of people are saying like you could study, you could went to college, thanks to what Castro did.
That's the good thing.
It's actually a sense of, ¿cómo se dice? Un sentido de a sense of thankfulness, de agradecimiento, ¿no? Que son las personas que están a favor, las personas que están a favor. So a sense of thankfulness.
Esa gente está...
Depend on the generation. Te digo, mi mamá es
Mi puro, papá, mi
his
puro.
father, even his father.
Really?
You cannot talk anything against the government
de hoy
next to them. Cannot take a single word about it.
Él es capaz de defender el sistema a un nivel.
He's able to defend the system to a high level. That's
Él
what
ahora me
he's
dice que todo es responsabilidad de los Estados Unidos.
He's now saying that the responsible for what's happened in Cuba is American government. That's his father telling that.
Okay.
You know. So, but if you talk to my mother, you say a word.
Tu mamá es...
My mom.
Ojo.
I said to every friend that comes to my home, like, shh, shh, like, don't talk about anything against the government. Then she will tell you, you know what? You see what happened in Venezuela? And she told you about the Middle Eastern.
¿Tu mamá trabaja en eso?
My mom, she consumed so much Telesur.
As we walked through Old Havana, I wanted to know where Cuba's enslaved Africans came from and which part of Africa shaped the culture that still lives here today.
So what countries do you think most of the Afro-Cubans come from? What West African countries? I know Nigeria.
Number one, Nigeria.
Nigeria. Because of the Yoruba.
The Yoruba.
Yeah.
The Yoruba. Nigeria. Congo.
Okay.
Nigeria, Congo. Habían otros también de Nigeria, Congo, Ghana.
La gente que venía
Ghanaians.
La gente que venía de los países.
Sí.
42, de 42 a 46 tribus vinieron.
Like, we are counting around 42. From 42 to 45 different tribes.
Oh, wow.
So it was not only one place. No.
Right. And when, okay, it ended in Brazil in 1888. So when
1888. In Cuba was 1886.
1886.
Yes.
I had only been in Cuba for a few hours, but one thing already stood out. Havana felt surprisingly peaceful. Despite the economic struggles I was seeing, I felt comfortable walking through the streets, and I wanted to understand why Cuba felt so safe.
Asiel is actually alarmed by how peaceful people are, you know, in conditions like this one.
If it was in U.S.,
If it was in U.S.,
it would be a riot.
that would be like a whoosh,
They would pull out
you
the
know,
guns.
protest. Exactly. But in Cuba, you see people are just drinking beers, like talking, smiling, even smiling in this context. That's crazy, you know.
All the BPs have...
He said that he went to the beach yesterday, and there were some people just drinking alcohol and some music, and that's it.
After several hours of walking, listening, and learning, it was finally time for my first meal in Cuba. The restaurant was absolutely beautiful, with several levels, open air spaces, and rooftop dining overlooking Old Havana. It was the perfect place to slow down, take in the atmosphere, and experience another part of Cuban culture, the food. Imagine a place where children and women can walk the streets alone and still feel safe, even at night. As we rode through Havana, that was one of the first things I noticed. This is not the image of Cuba that is usually presented to us in the U.S. media.
A lot of girls walking by themselves at night.
Yes, it's safe, completely safe in Cuba.
It's safe.
Yes, it is. You will see kids playing around in the street, hide and seek at this time. It's highly safe.
That's good.
Even in moments like this, people are like taking some measures, you know, but still it's very safe.
As we moved through Havana, I noticed several beautiful hotels that look every bit as impressive as those in other major cities. My guide explained that many operate through partnership between the Cuban government and private or foreign companies. They reflect another side of Cuba, a country struggling with shortages, yet still maintaining spaces designed to attract visitors from around the world.
This is a nice place. It's owned by the government.
This all hotel.
This hotel.
Park Central Park Hotel.
It's nice.
It's very nice.
So who stays there?
Who stays?
Rich people,
Foreigners, tourists,
But no Americans.
no Americans. Let me take you here one second. Look at this. They have music right on the roof.
Oh, wow. Can I stop and get some footage? As music played outside, I entered the Inglaterra Hotel, what my guide described as the first hotel built in Havana. Walking through such historical property added another layer to my first night in Cuba. From the live band outside to the energy inside, I was beginning to experience a side of Havana filled with history, music, and nightlife. As I entered the hotel, one of the first images I noticed was a portrait of Antonio Maceo, known as the Bronze Titan. Maceo was an Afro-Cuban general and one of the greatest leaders in Cuba's fight for independence. Seeing his image displayed so prominently was another reminder of the important roles Afro-Cubans played in building this nation.
That we have in Cuba back in 18. Actually, he lasted from. Actually, they erected one of the most bloody wars that we have in Cuba, independent war, the 10 Years War. That's the name of the struggle, the war that he led. His name is Antonio Maceo, right here. And the reason why his picture is here is because he was hosted in this hotel. Okay. Before going to Jamaica, he passed and he was actually living in this hotel. But it's a very important corner. It's a very, very important one. I'll talk to you more.
Okay.
From there, we made our way up to the hotel's rooftop club. It was a Monday night, but the music was playing, people were dancing, and Havana's nightlife was very much alive.
In the city.
Oldest hotel in the city.
This one.
1875.
They've done a great job.
They've been renovated. They have been renovating everything, yeah.
Wow. 4 floors. But it looked like it's bigger.
It used to have only be the below area, but then they constructed a second floor, and from 1875 then constructed the rest of the floors.
Oh.
It was added later.
While I was talking with my guide, the music stopped, the lights disappeared, and suddenly the entire party went dark.
At this point, number 0. You see, now you have a blackout. You have like a power outage. Do you remember what you said when you were going in the elevator?
Oh, like, oh my God.
Imagine we were trapped in the elevator.
Oh, I would have. If somebody could be in there right now.
Now I don't know, because this area doesn't. They don't shut down every time. This area, it's like they're privileged somehow. Yes.
But what surprised me the most was that nobody panicked. People remained calm because power outages had become a normal life in Cuba. About 30 seconds later, the lights and music came back on, thanks to the building's inverter. And just like that, the party continued as if nothing had happened. As I headed back to my Airbnb on the motorbike, much of Havana was still covered in darkness. This was only my first day in Cuba, but I had already seen so much beauty, history, struggle, resilience, and a side of a country rarely shown to the United States. And it was all happening on an island just 90 miles south of Key West, Florida. Riding through those dark streets gave me time to think about everything I had experienced in only a few hours. I had heard Cubans speak honestly about the revolution, the embargo, socialism, Afro-Cuban life, and the challenges facing their country. There was still so much more for me to learn, but one thing was already clear. Cuba was far more complicated than the story I had been told back home. My first day in Cuba challenged many of the things I thought I understood about this country. I had already witnessed its beauty, history, political complexity, and the daily struggles of the Cuban people. But my journey was only beginning. As day 2 began, my guide introduced me to a part of Cuba's racial history I had never heard before. He explained that after slavery, Cuba encouraged immigration from Europe and other parts of the world in an effort to whiten the population and prevent Afro-Cubans from becoming the overwhelming majority. It was a troubling history and one I wanted to understand more deeply.
Actually, the racial profile of Cuba changed. It was more white.
Really?
That's a process called whitening that was held by the Spanish in Cuba.
When was this? After 1804?
It's actually beginning after 1804, 1830, 1840s, 1850s. They start to open Cuba for Asians. Asians started to come to Cuba from 1874. Asians, I'm saying Chinese people. It's the area of Chinese. It's called Chinatown. Chinatown in Cuba. So that process was very, very, it was very sad. So they were bringing people so that they can blend with African enslaved, and the Cuban people population was gradually changed.
Okay.
Was gradually white.
My first day in Cuba introduced me to the beauty, struggles, and complicated history of this island. But I have only begun to understand the depths of its African roots. In episode 2, I connect with Beyond Roots as we go deeper into Afro-Cuban history, culture, religion, and identity, and discover how Africa continues to live throughout Cuba. This journey is just beginning.
Welcome to Beyond Roots. This is the center of the roots. We were founded in 2016 when President Obama came to Cuba.
Really?
Yeah, and we reappeared on the map. So our boss, Adriana, she was professor at the University of Havana. She wanted to have some extra income. She wanted to do something different. So she was very young. So Airbnb started working here as well. So she decided to start with the first Afro-Cuban experience. They were so successful, and now we have more than 5 experiences. We have the store, we have an Afro salon, and now we have a coffee place. But at first, we were in a very tiny apartment. It was what they could afford at the time, and it's great because most of the entrepreneurships here can't afford the physical space. So it was great. It was a very tiny apartment. Believe me, we had the store like in the living room. We had the Afro salon in 1 bedroom, and we were like very tight, but you know, we were appreciating it. It was our place. But more than 1 year ago, we received this space here. It was dirty, it was like destroyed, it was awful, it was very hard. But we found our crowdfunding campaign, we raised some money, we had a lot of support, and we were able to do this that we have here, what we call the Center of the Roots. Because what we do here is promote our Afro-Cuban roots, or Afro-Cuban culture. So right here in this space, the store, we welcome more than 15 female entrepreneurs and also some male entrepreneurs. Why? Because entrepreneurship here is kind of new. It's like we don't have any experience about administration or entrepreneurship or finances. It's been like little by little trying to do something different. And it's been hard, but we are the first Afro-Cuban store in the whole country. So we have a big community. We were like, okay, bring your stuff here, your products, so you can sell them.
It's a hub.
And you can be seen as well, yeah.
It's a hub
It's
for Black empowerment.
Exactly. So
I love it.
It's a way to support them, and they also support us, because if you take a look to the whole store, it looks like everything is coming from the same sources, because right here is the way we all feel the Afro-Cuban culture. It's like a same mindset. And I mean, we are very proud to be able to have all these female network right here at our store.
I see the Orishas.
Exactly. We have over.
I was just in Brazil 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
Salvador.
Exactly. Candomblé and Santeria have a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
So we have like the same deities, and some of our rituals are like very similar. I mean, you will see it today. It's amazing. Right here we have our t-shirts that will be another way to promote our Afro-Cuban culture, with all these words coming from the Yoruba culture, and also related to our hair. Like, for example, mi pinta si es Orisha. It's like my outfit, the way I look. It is Orisha. Why? Orisha is the name of the African deities, right? But also for Cubans, it's the way we say that something is original. It's like my outfit is original. So the way I look is Orisha, like our deities, but at the same time, it's original. You know, so that kind of messages. Also, we have this one that says "Con todo sino pa qué." So for you, will be like go big or go home, something like that.
Okay.
With everything, otherwise for what? So it's like a you do it with all you have.
In less than 24 hours, Cuba had already challenged many of the things I thought I knew. I witnessed economic hardship, fuel shortages, and blackouts. But I also experienced safety, music, culture, and a deep sense of pride. I listened to Cubans speak honestly about socialism, the revolution, the United States embargo, and what they want for their country's future. And while I began learning about the experiences of Afro-Cubans, I knew there was much more history beneath the surface. In episode 2, I connect with Beyond Roots as we go deeper into Cuba's African past and explore how these roots continue to shape the island's religion, food, music, tradition, and identity. My first day in Cuba was over, but the real journey was just beginning. This is PA. Thank you for watching The Unfiltered World.